Hello and welcome to Grid Rankers, the F1 history podcast that tries to answer the question, if you had a nickel for every time the former Minardi outfit won a race, how many nickels would you have? Only two, right? But it's weird that it happened twice. I'm the Mobile Chicane, and every episode I'm joined by a special guest from the world of motorsport to discuss the good, the bad, and the in-between from Formula One's past, as we attempt to compile a definitive ranking list of every driver, car, team, Grand Prix, and anything else we can think of. Today, we're discussing future world champion Sebastian Vettel's first ever Grand Prix win, as the embryonic 21-year-old in his first full year in F1 navigated a damp Monza circuit to take Red Bull junior outfit Toro Rosso to the top step of the podium before Big Papa Red Bull had ever done so. We'll discuss how that came to be and the rest of the action on and off track that day, as mutters of Ferrari bias and outcries over customer cars continued to rumble on in the background. Joining me to chat about all that and more, the just handsome Jason Hassett.
And you're just saying that because I look like you without a beard. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, it should be fun. I have to say, you're a lot more prepared than our podcast.
This is what happens when we don't have the other one involved at all. We can just be more focused and more professional with these sort of things.
Yeah, it's all Casual's fault. I like that.
So, on the topic of the 2008 Italian Grand Prix, now I know you are in particular a very big Vettel fan. For me, it was always kind of a bit more of a mixed history with it in terms of, I think it's the same with anyone who once someone becomes successful and starts winning all the time, you tend to cool off them a bit more. But I know when Vettel first arrived, I really enjoyed seeing this kind of young talent. He had a great kind of like cheeky little personality to him as well. He was very kind of personable and doing stuff in that Toro Rosso. Cooled off a bit in the Red Bull years, which understandable when someone wins all the time and your natural bias is you want to see other people winning. And obviously he had that very kind of ruthless edge when he was at the top of his game as well. And then in the latter part of his career, you could kind of enjoy the guy a bit more as you can, again, some more of that personality came out and he could kind of be a bit more himself. But yeah, I know you're a big Vettel fan. Were you already a Vettel fan by the time this Grand Prix came around, or was this the kind of thing that cemented him as one of your favourites?
I think this added to it, but it was kind of, I wasn't a huge Vettel fan. So I started watching in 2004. As I was watching it, it was kind of off the back of like family and anyone, the very few people I knew in Ireland at the time who kind of watched Formula One. Was off the back of like Schumacher constantly winning, and Schumacher, for football fans, I guess, was kind of the Manchester United of Formula One. It was like at that time in history, everyone was just sick of them winning. And even I remember seeing an interview with Bernie Ecclestone being like, well, we can't peg back Ferrari, which is kind of exactly what they did. So yeah, I didn't really have like a huge fan base at the time fandom at the time for anyone. Alonso was exciting to watch. Lewis had just come in. That was exciting. I think at the time I was more of maybe a Kimi Räikkönen fan, just because I enjoyed the fact that he just didn't really say anything. But then there was just all of this hype around Sebastian Vettel, and I think I slowly became a fan because of the Adrian Newey hype more than anything. I've always been kind of very much into the technical side of F1 more so than the drivers. So there was all the controversy, which we'll get into, the hype around that. And then you had this really quick guy come in and all of a sudden, just build up. So yeah, it was in 2008 I became a proper fan. And I think probably that win did add a lot to it because it was just a spectacular weekend. And he kind of became the new Rainmaster after Michael left. So it was like, I guess kind of, it'll be exciting to watch another German become kind of the new dominant force in F1. And I remember joking about that and saying it'll be funny in future when we're all bored of Vettel destroying everyone. And it happened. So it was kind of fun. I have to say I was probably less of a fan after the 4 seasons where he dominated as well, just because like you, I'm Irish. We like the underdogs. I know you're not Irish. I just mean you like the underdogs.
Yeah. Surprised so I was Irish all along.
We are actually twins. Yeah. I think I'm like you, where I just I get sick of someone winning all the time, and I always end up supporting the underdog. Like at the moment, I'm prepping myself to be a Colapinto fan again, just because I do get like I was massively behind Max, and then he started winning, and I was like, let's see someone else win now. Enough of this, So now been a bit of a Lando fanboy the last year as well, just because he hasn't won a championship yet. As soon as he does, I'll be sick of him as well. But yeah, that kind of backs up where that started, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, 2008 was a great time to be excited for Vettel because he'd come in partway through 2007, replacing Scott Speed in the Toro Rosso, and
or Scott Speed as well.
Yeah, we all love Scott Speed. I'm saving the very last episode so we could just slot him in at number one. But yeah, again, I instantly remember kind of him dazzling, like you say, in the rain. There was that absolute deluge you had in Fuji that year, where again Toro Rosso, who had only very recently kind of turned from Minardi into their outfit, and all of a sudden Sebastian was sitting in third in the race before he clashes into the back of the Red Bull of Mark Webber there. And then, that was gutting to see. But then next time out in China, in damp conditions again, he was putting a thing. I think he finished fourth that day as well. So we already kind of seen this clear potential from the kids. 2008 had started a little bit quieter for him. It had been a bit more instant packed. I don't think he fully got on with that initial spec of car. But within a sort of 4 races, they kind of introduced a new spec for it, and it really kind of sung with Vettel in the car, especially alongside a teammate like Sebastian Bourdais, who we'll touch on a little bit later on as well. But, even coming into Italy, he'd already had, a really promising good year where he was starting to get quite dependable for putting that thing a lot higher than it had ever been before and scoring lots of points. He was already confirmed as going to Red Bull for 2009 at this point as well. But obviously this weekend was another level.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was... When did they upgrade that car? Because I remember, I think the season started with 4 retirements, right? Like literally just retirement after retirement. Was it Monaco when they brought in the ST3? I think it was. Or
I believe it. This is all going off my memory from when I made a video about Sebastian Bourdais, and that was like a year ago. But I'm pretty sure it's fairly early on into the season, and it was something that was much better suited to kind of Vettel's handling style than Bourdais.
If I remember correctly as well, Bourdais, I think, continued with the old chassis for another couple of races too. I might be wrong on that though. I don't think they had them out. It shows how different Formula One was then, right? They will use last year's car for a few races and then you can upgrade to the new one. It just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, well, again, we had this conversation when Peter was on the show a couple of episodes back, and we were talking about Super Aguri, the way they would rock up in 2006, not even with a car. They sort of got their entry, went, oh yeah, we should build a car at some point, and then entered about half the year with a 4-year-old Arrows car, which, imagine if Cadillac rocked up in 2025 and decided to use, an old Williams or something like that for half the year. It just wouldn't happen. And yet it was only about 20 odd years ago, which is not that long ago, really. But that is akin to something you'd see in like the 80s or the 90s.
Yeah, that I think it was actually, if I remember correctly, right, there was all the controversy around it. So if I remember, it was this incident, as well as there was something else I think that sparked in 2009 or 2010 them to finally go, right, no more customer, like we're done with this now. I think it was this incident of Nui with these 2 cars, but I'm not 100% on that. I have a feeling
this definitely didn't help, and we will definitely kind of get into the thick of that later on, because obviously that's a lot of the backdrop in this story.
Yeah.
In terms of the actual race itself, coming into the weekend here, we were in the midst of 2008, and we have the title battle going on with Lewis Hamilton and Felipe Massa, and we're coming to this off the back of Belgium, which had been controversial kind of enough as it was. Where Hamilton had won on the road there, he'd been battling with Raikkonen towards the end of the race, cut a chicane towards the end, and it was deemed that he'd gained an advantage by doing so. So was later given a 25-second penalty, which drops him from first down to third. Massa got promoted into that winning position. So coming to this very tight on points. So Hamilton's got 76 points, Massa on 74. So very, very close to this point. And even just after that, you still had the likes of Kubica and Raikkonen, who their title challenges had kind of blunted a bit, but they were still sort of in the mix, about 20 odd points behind the pair of them, but they were still, in the conversation, and then just needed to kind of have a good run there. But we're arriving in Italy with all that kind of going on in the background. So it was kind of nice in a way that we ended up having a different story to kind of follow this weekend, and not just focusing on more of that controversy.
Yeah. Obviously, both Massa and Hamilton driving a similar Ferrari after getting the designs in Woking the year before. Yeah,
Very good.
this was so this was near the end of the season too, right? So we were like 4 races from the end. So that title battle was very much heating up on track as well. They were very close. Luckily for Hamilton, his teammate wasn't any sort of trouble at all. Was it Kovalainen, right?
Yeah, Heikki Kovalainen at the time, yeah.
Massa, what happened to Raikkonen that year as well? I guess just too much tequila. But yeah, it was a really exciting battle. And then obviously in qualifying, that's where that kind of fell apart. But that then built up and we get Timo Glock messing around in this race as well, which comes in later in the season. But yeah, it was a very interesting title battle. Although I think, if I'm honest, I know this isn't part of the podcast, but 2007 I think was a little bit more interesting in terms of title battle. But this one was fun.
This one was still funny. I think, I think always looked favourably on 2007 because it was, that 3-way title battle going on. And even Massa was kind of involved at points in that as well, if not always in the mix. So this one threatened to do that again, sort of about midway part through the season. You had, when Kubica and BMW were running strongly. I think it was either after that or maybe the British Grand Prix not long after that as well. They were all effectively tied at the top of the table, or 4 drivers separated by 2 points or something like that. But Kubica and Raikkonen had fallen away for kind of 2 different reasons, and it was just Massa and Hamilton left.
Of course. And the real winner of 2008 really was Flavio anyway,
He won something. that's for certain.
But yeah, so we had a really close title battle going into this. It was 2 points, you said, as this one.
Yeah, just 2 points between the two of them. And Massa, there's a quote from him before the weekend where he's saying, I really hope that this is going to be a nice, dry event for us, that we can all have a bit more consistency. And obviously the F1 god said absolutely to none of that. Pretty much every single session. Yeah, even the weather. Every single session was affected by rain. I think second practice as well, but here's the only one where they ever got to do some dry running throughout the whole race.
Yeah, I think it was literally just one session of dry, so they had no idea, which is interesting in the race then, because I think they were at one point thinking there would be dry weather, and if I remember correctly, it was Brundle on the radio, or no, it wouldn't be Brundle at the time, was it? But anyway, I can't remember who the commentator was back then, but basically, this will be interesting. They haven't done basically any dry running, so yeah.
I mean, you got a sign of how mixed of it was just from kind of first practice alone, because you had Adrian Sutil went fastest of all in a 4-cylinder, which was probably the slowest car in the field at that point. He was about half a second quicker than Rubens Barrichello's Honda, which was probably about the second worst car on the field. Then you had the other 4-cylinder of Fisichella. Then you had Glock about 4 seconds behind Sutil in 4th place. 6 of the 20 cars didn't even bother running, including the both pairs of McLarens and BMWs, because it was just so wet. It was just kind of, chaotic all around. And it's probably worth pointing at this point in time that Vettel wasn't happy with the car at this point. He'd run in those first couple of practice sessions and gone 10th in both. 10th in both, I should say. But tweaks made to the car going into Saturday, and he suddenly felt like he had a lot more confidence in the car, which is obviously always paramount for any driver, but especially when you're kind of going into these wet conditions.
Yeah.
So he was second fastest in third free practice, third in Q1, first in Q2, and then obviously first in Q3 as well.
I think, if I remember correctly, he was helped as well by, was that Hamilton and one of the Red Bulls, and maybe Massa as well went out on inters in Q3, I think, too, right? Or in one.
Yeah, so kind of that he was the big story, and obviously a lot of the championship, those protagonists, I kind of thought we mentioned before, were all kind of by the wayside, really. I think Massa was the only one who got into the top 10, and he still only went 6th. Right. The rest all go out in Q2. So you had Kubica 11th, Raikkonen 14th, Hamilton 15th. Kubica said that there was some late rain in Q2, which is why he couldn't improve on his time. The latter two were later onto the track. Hamilton gambled on going onto a set of intermediates, and by the time that he realised that was a mistake, had to come back in for those extreme wets, the weather was just getting worse and worse. So there was no way he could kind of improve on that position where he was.
Yeah.
Fun fact, that was the first time that Hamilton never made it to Q3 in his career at that point, which...
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but that, which, testament to his skills, but also obviously how good the McLaren he was in had been up to that point as well.
And a preview to 2024.
Exactly. But yeah, the surprise, Sebastian Vettel is the one on pole. Yes, he was running with a lighter fuel load. I think it was about 4 laps lighter than a lot of others that day.
Okay.
But I think I looked at the numbers of it, and I think even if you kind of adjust that to topping that fuel load a little bit more on the performance slot of that as well, he still probably would have been around on the front row anyway.
I think Bourdais was in 4th, right? His teammate. So
Bourdais was indeed in 4th. So yeah, you had Vettel on pole. You had the other McLaren of Kovalainen in 2nd, just very, very shy of pole, it should be said. And Mark Webber was then there in 3rd. But yeah, obviously the story of the day was Vettel on pole. It was the youngest pole position in history, which is a record that still stands to this day. Which okay, I'm surprised to see. But yeah, Verstappen was never able to kind of get the grasp on that, despite the fact that he was about 3 years younger when he won his first race. He just never had a pole within that same time frame as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Antonelli or one of the young guns this year can take that away from him. Because how old was Vettel at that point? Was he 21?
It was 21 and maybe about a month or so. Yeah, just 21 years old.
Okay, right, okay. So yeah, if Mercedes get their act together this year, perhaps that could be broken. Interesting. I didn't realize that was still held. That's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Entirely possible. But yeah, it was fantastic to see. It was difficult to kind of then judge what would happen the next year. And I think certainly from my perspective, again, it was such a huge underdog story, and you hoped that maybe something could come of it the next day. I think even if he'd just taken a podium the next day or just another big point, so I think that would have been a success within itself. But obviously you had a lot more to talk about on the Sunday.
Yeah, because I remember that season, like him, when he did get the new chassis. I think it was, again, I'm pretty sure it was Monaco, the new chassis, and he came 5th, I think, during that race. And even that was like quite impressive given where the team was. And, Red Bull still was quite new at that point and still a bit of a laughing stock anyway. So this junior team, Minardi team getting there was interesting. So yeah, huge deal. I think that was, am I wrong in saying that was Toro Rosso's only pole as well?
I believe so, yes. That's going off the top of my head. My memory serves me correctly. They have not had any since then. I can't think of any occasion where they would have.
I don't think I can't remember now all of Minardi's history, but I don't think they had. Maybe they had one pole, actually. I can't remember. But
Minardi never had a pole. I think they had one front row start in about 1990, I want to say.
Okay.
But you're never on poles. Obviously, this was, and like I say, this was still a time when it only recently transitioned from Minardi. Red Bull had bought it at the end of 2005. So a lot of staff that were still there were ex-Minardi staff. So this was obviously a real kind of day of days for them, just on the Saturday alone to have that kind of success.
It was still kind of seen as the baby Ferrari by the Tifosi, because obviously Giancarlo Minardi was from nearby as well. Fiorano. Oh no, not Fiorano. Right? Where is it? You'll remember the name. Where is their factory again? Don't remember.
Of the Minardi factory, Faenza.
Faenza. That's I was saying Fiorano, but yeah, Faenza.
Yeah, we got the F part right, so this is close enough.
Right. Ferrari F. It was close. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
So let's fast forward then on to Sunday, and you get the first little bit of help that Vettel gets is that there's a lot of heavy rain prior to the race starting. So the track, though it's not raining anymore, it's still obviously extremely kind of slippery. Everyone is starting on extreme wets, and the FIA confirm a few minutes before that the race is going to start under the safety car. That alone is a fantastic advantage that you can have in your back pocket if you're starting on pole like Vettel was, because under normal conditions, you're always under risk that you can have a poor start, you can get caught up in an incident, especially going into that first corner at Monza, and especially in the wet as well. It could have all gone very wrong, but instead, you can safely kind of follow behind the safety car for a couple of laps, and then, to quote him from the notes here, he can just boot it as soon as the track goes green, knowing that he's not going to have any of that kind of spray that everyone else is going to kind of have as well. So
Who
already kind of
was
like.
on second and third behind him? I can't remember off the top of my head. You probably have it there. But
So Kovalainen was just behind him, and then you had Webber in third and Bourdais behind that.
oh, okay. Well, two useless drivers and Webber, so it's not too bad, I suppose.
So race starts, they all kind of get away cleanly, apart from Bourdais, unfortunately, which was a real shame. Again, this has been covered on the channel before. We looked at his time at Toro Rosso. He had a lot of bad luck kind of that year, and could have looked a lot better than he actually was. But there was a problem with his steering wheel at the start, so he stalled, gets pushed back to the pits, and though he starts, it's a lap down, and there's only so much you could do. For a wet race, there wasn't a huge amount of retirements either, so he only came home in about 18th place at the end of the day, set the second fastest lap, which potentially, shows what could have been. I mean, it would have been, it's a fantastic story as it is to see Vettel winning that day, but if it could have been a 1-2 or even a 1-3 or something like that, that would have obviously been
podium.
incredible.
Yeah. Would have been amazing. Yeah. Did Bourdais continue on then after 2008? I can't remember him in 2009.
Very briefly, kind of in 2009, but yeah, I think there'd been a lot of talk where he'd been again replaced over the winter, and I think as soon as they had opportunity to boot him out, he did. So he lasted a sort of another half season before we saw the end of him. But yeah, this was kind of.
I was just going to say, you have to wonder if he had got second place here in Italy behind Vettel, perhaps would have maybe been kept around longer.
Yeah, well, this was one of two potential podiums that kind of went by the wayside for him because he is not guaranteed here, but it's starting from so far up, and the advantage that Toro Rosso had in the wet was obviously a great opportunity. The previous race in Belgium, when we'd had all the rain towards the end there, he chose to stay out while all the others were switching onto the wet tyres. So he was on dries going around the circuit, but he was still running in about third place, which with Hamilton's penalty would have been second place if he could have held on to it. But the rain just kept coming down and down, and he eventually kind of tumbled back through the points. Unfortunately, and Vettel even got past him on that lap as well. So it's a real what if kind of story for Bourdais, but obviously the day wasn't about him at the end of it.
Of course, yeah.
Vettel hits the front, two laps in, safety car comes on in, and Vettel just absolutely kind of floors it really from this point on. Kovalainen behind, decent driver, no mug, but not a champion-esque kind of level of talent in that car, but still
the Perez
Vettel
of his day, if you will.
A Perez it could be like a fair maybe like comparison for that sort of thing. Absolutely. I mean, the gap goes from 2 seconds to about 6 seconds, and Vettel is, like he says, he's just kind of pushing around every single lap that he could. Not only to kind of keep that Kovalainen at bay, but then there were those other like protagonists that we mentioned before, the likes of Massa, Hamilton, Raikkonen, a lot further down the order than they should have been, who were then kind of operating on those different strategies and wanting to work their way through. So that was, a huge amount of pressure for kind of Vettel to have to deal with, because it was an opportunity to win your first race, but in such tricky conditions as well, and with that pressure of knowing so many of kind of those other great talents would be chasing you as the race kind of goes on.
Yeah, and he was pushing it quite a bit on those wets as well, because I remember he locked up or went wide at turn 4, only a few laps in. You could see a lot of the drivers kind of struggling to find the grip. So it was quite impressive how quickly he pulled away. Obviously, you can pin some of that down to the fact that, like you said earlier, you're not in the spray, you're not in amongst the other drivers. It does give you a good advantage. But in those wet conditions, that's when you see kind of the real drivers. And it's like, to give fairness to Hamilton as well, I know I've bashed him a bit already, but he's been very, very good in the wet a few times too, and it usually is a sign of a very good driver, because just constantly finding the limits. And I remember watching the race, and obviously they had the safety car start, because that was back when wet tires actually worked, and Bernie would say, no, we'll just start under the safety car, but we're racing, we're not delaying it like they do a lot now. Something could easily have just gone wrong for Vettel, young driver, under that kind of pressure, never leading a race before. You've got just much, much, much quicker cars in general behind, probably knowing that Raikkonen, Massa, Webber, Hamilton are all going to be coming through the field. All it takes is one ride over the curb and a slip into the gravel, and that's it. And it's not like we didn't see Hamilton and Massa and Webber over the course of the day before in qualifying, running off the track, sliding around, and yeah, so a very, very impressive start to the race by Vettel, I thought, at the time. Again, kind of cementing me becoming a Vettel fanboy.
Well, yeah, they always say, don't they, kind of rain is like kind of the great equalizer in this kind of sport, is when, regardless of the machine you're in, everyone is kind of in the same condition. It's about how you can manage those conditions and what you can do with it. And like you say, this kind of really helped to establish Vettel as that kind of, like I say, that second Schumacher-esque rainmeister in those sort of conditions as well. I mean, if you look at the gaps, within 10 laps, he's about 18 seconds clear of Massa down in sixth place. He's about 30 seconds ahead of Raikkonen and Hamilton. Yes, they're negotiating kind of traffic at that point, and Vettel is running with a slightly lighter fuel load as well, but it's still, an astonishing kind of achievement within that kind of machinery and that situation, like you say, with so much kind of pressure on those shoulders as well.
Yeah, definitely nonetheless impressive. Because it is one of those things like where you just don't know from lap to lap. That's what's so interesting about watching wet races like that and watching drivers like that is, as they always explain, it's like one lap the grip is completely different to the next because you've got cars kind of moving the water continuously. So your braking point at every corner, at every lap, has to be slightly adjusted, and it's just all done through feel. So yeah, wet racing, we don't get much of it these days, unfortunately, but wet racing is generally one of the most exciting things to watch because you can really tell the men from the boys in terms of who can really, navigate it, as you said. So yeah.
And it's always, I think, exciting, especially when you're watching a wet to dry race or something like that, as well as conditions are improving. It's working out who takes those gambles and what works when as well. And we saw a bit of that in this race as well. It's working out when the right time to switch over those tyres and try different strategies is. And there's always, the ones further back who try it for a gamble because they've got nothing to lose and they get it wrong. And then you find out that a lap later, actually, that would have been, the perfect strategy. You just had to wait a little bit more. So it's that little cat and mouse game.
Yeah.
So back to the race itself. So we hit lap 17, and there's a few crucial kind of check boxes for Vettel at this point because it's about when he's about to make his first kind of stop. He's about 11 seconds clear of Kovalainen and second at this point, and he's about 33 seconds clear of Nico Rosberg, who is an important character kind of in this narrative because he was kind of among the first of those who was going to be one-stopping that race. Vettel was going for a two-stop, so that was something he had to think about covering. But by having that gap, Vettel had establishment that he could take that first stop and still come out ahead of the Williams, which is obviously hugely crucial in terms of maintaining track position and not affecting strategy too much. And after that, Kovalainen, Webber, Massa, they're briefly ahead of Vettel for about a grand total of 4 laps. But then they head to the pits. Vettel retains the lead. So he's kind of dealt with those 3 threats, if you like, either, because they're a little bit more out of the equation now. But now he's got, the likes of Hamilton and Rosberg now chasing him on those different kind of strategies.
They stayed on wets at this point in the race, right? It was wet to wet, I think. They didn't go with intermediates.
So they're running the 1 stops rather than the 2 stops, keeping on those wets as well. So now they're running on a lot lighter fuel compared to what Vettel was doing as well. And they've had more time on track with these tyres, scrubbed them a little bit more. So they're kind of getting quite well suited to these conditions because obviously it gets a little bit drier. They're just trying to find a bit more of that kind of traction in places. We should talk about how Hamilton actually had a really good, certainly opening part of this race. He was having to kind of carve his way through the field, but he was doing it really well. Getting past the likes of the BMWs and Alonso and a Glock that were on track. And by the time we get to lap 26, he's just about a second shy of Vettel and looking like considerably good to either pass him on track or after Vettel makes his second stop compared to where Lewis is just going to do the one. So again, just as little kind of critical points of the race where it could have very easily switched from one side to the other. And again, like you say, it just takes one mistake from the likes of Vettel in that kind of situation for this to completely flip on its head.
Yeah, held it together the whole way through, basically. But I didn't realize Hamilton got him within a second. I don't remember that. One of the things I do remember from Hamilton was I think he had a bit of a tap with Webber at some point during that stint as well. They touched wheels, and I think Weber. It was either Weber or Coulthard. I can't remember. It was one of the Red Bulls, and he went off into the chicane. And it sticks out in my mind because there's a few incidents during 2008 that I always find funny now, looking back on these races, because we talk about how, Verstappen's this aggressive driver and Vettel at points was this aggressive driver, and there's a few of them, and it's all the young guys. And I remember during that period, it was like, oh, Hamilton doesn't leave much, does he? He's very aggressive on track. We just never would hear that these days. It's just completely the opposite. But yeah, and then how close was Massa at that point? Do you remember? Do you know? I can't remember off the top of my head, but Massa was floating around with Fernando Alonso, I think, a bit further up the track then, obviously.
Yeah, Massa was floating around a little bit, but he wasn't really kind of seen as a bit of a threat at this point in the race. It was really kind of a case of what's Hamilton going to do, and to a lesser extent, what's kind of Rosberg going to do. Again, this was sort of a pre-Mercedes Rosberg at Williams, so still promising talent, but he wasn't quite at the heights he would be, but still looking kind of good.
Toyota powered Williams at that point, I believe, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
But yeah, we spoke just a second ago kind of about like making these kind of crucial split second decisions and what works and what doesn't, and that proves to kind of be the undoing of the race for Hamilton and Rosberg, because Hamilton comes in lap 27, Rosberg comes in a lap later as well, but they both stick with the extreme wets rather than switching to the intermediates. I think Hamilton was probably a little burnt by having made that wrong choice in qualifying and not wanting to do the same again, which proves a shame, because Coulthard was in around the same time as well, and he is that first one to kind of gamble on that switch across to the intermediates. Proves just a lap too early for that, because like I say, he goes off at that first chicane, not quite able to get the grip, but then not long after that, I think it's Heidfeld comes into the pits on lap 29, just a lap later, and then you have Alonso, and soon everyone else is switching to Inters, and that proves to kind of be the right kind of tyre, which it's such a huge shame. It's not a huge shame for the narrative, but in terms of for Hamilton getting another win, if he'd had the bravery to kind of make that call, then surely he's walking away with the win at the end of this day.
Yeah. Luckily, Flavio helped out later on in Singapore anyway. But I guess that's the kind of the choice you have to make there, especially. Like, I'm glad you prepared, because I can't remember the tire choices. I just knew it was wet, Inter, but I didn't know when or where. For a moment, I was thinking it was wet, then Inter, then wet again. But thankfully, someone prepared, and that is you today.
Someone's got to do a job.
Yeah. I guess you have to. That's the roll of the dice in Formula One all the time, isn't it? And just the luck as well that maybe Vettel was able to stick out a bit longer, and the teams could keep an eye on, what the Inters were like on everyone else. Where, that it's just. Sorry, just off the top of my head, it's just thinking like, it's crazy how few little decisions can completely change a race for a driver in Formula One. Part of kind of the beauty of the sport, isn't it? Unlike, say, boring tennis or golf or something, it's not all just on the driver. It's just, you could have a tiny decision by one strategist calling a lap too early, and boom, that's it. Your whole race is done.
Yeah, well, again, you look at it in the isolation of kind of this Grand Prix. You say Hamilton makes the right choice at this point in time and goes on to win the race. That completely changes the entire end of the season. In this case, we wouldn't perhaps have that 2008 Brazilian Grand Prix and all the, the fantastic drama that kind of came around with that as well. So, like you say, just that one little decision, it completely switches that whole kind of timeline that we've got here.
Yeah, insane. We wouldn't have the "is that Glock" moment, any of it. It's crazy. Yeah.
But Heidfeld, Alonso, they all come in for the Inters, and it's basically perfect timing for those guys, because they were only going to go for single stops as well, so it allows them to kind of jump up the order. But it wrecks the entire races for both Hamilton and Rosberg, because they were intending to do a single stop, but now they need to come back into the pits, basically, because they've just been a smidgen too early in terms of when their pit stop window opened for them as well. So they get it, they're forced into that kind of extra stop later on. But for Vettel, absolutely kind of perfect scenes for him, because it means he can kind of stick out as long as possible, utilize that kind of low fuel load that he's circulating with, and then he can be amongst the kind of last of those to switch to Inters and still come out in the lead. And from there, there's not much else to the race for Vettel on that point there, because it's literally just a case of keeping your eye on the ball, which, yeah, well, again, he does with aplomb, even though, there's so much to concentrate on, so much to consider, and all the pressure around with it. But yeah, he seems totally fine and totally in control by that point.
If I remember watching the live coverage, Vettel had one of those races that's a nightmare for sponsors, because after the first pit stop, you kind of just didn't see him again on telly until kind of last lap of, he's done it. He's got just one corner left. Yeah. It must have been a nightmare for sponsors in 2023 as well for Red Bull, which didn't see Max once.
Yeah, definitely. Like you say, he just kind of cleared off at that point, and then comes on home from pole, leads 49 of the 53 laps, winning by about 12.5 seconds to become what was then the youngest winner in Formula One history. I've got the exact age, he was 21 years and 73 days old. So that was about a year younger than the previous record that Alonso had set, Hungary, 2003. Obviously, that's since been demolished by Max Verstappen, who was about 18 years old when he won in Spain. But a remarkable kind of achievement.
And could be beaten again this year if Antonelli wins in the first 3 races. So, records are made to be broken. Although, I think if Antonelli wins one of the first 3 races, I don't know if anyone's going to be able to beat it again. They'd have to literally drive like on their 18th birthday, because the regs are 18 years old, right? So that's going to be that then.
Yeah, I mean, we thought for a long time that Verstappen's probably wasn't going to get. I mean, even just I think he's the youngest guy to start a race or score points. I think that's probably never getting cracked. Yeah. So to run through kind of the rest of the finishes that day, Kovalainen, he comes home in second place, a bit more low key. Couldn't really do it again. He just couldn't live with the pace of what Vettel had that day. Clearly disappointed not to win that day, because that 2008 McLaren would comfortably be the best car that he'd ever be driving. He'd only be with McLaren for one more year, and then kind of drops to the back with Lotus for the rest of his time in Formula One. So at least he can say on his CV he won a race. He won in Hungary this year, but disappointed not to. I mean, good points in the constructors in that battle between McLaren and Ferrari, but I suppose some more subdued disappointment for him. But I don't think there's too many that probably lament him not winning that day, given the storyline going elsewhere. So then you had Kubica finishing up on the podium. He got that perfectly timed kind of final stop that let him jump up the order, and the same for Alonso and Heidfeld. We did have a little tete-a-tete in 6th and 7th. So Massa was 6th, Hamilton 7th at the end. Lewis had caught the Brazilian all the way through that kind of final stint, but just couldn't get past, as his tyres were starting to go off in these kind of slowly drying conditions. So the race finishes, and the championship battle is now just 1 point between the two of them heading into that latter part of the season.
Because there was only top 8 finishers. Was it top 8 or top 10?
Just top 8 back in those days. Yeah.
And it was very few points as well. It was 10 down to 1, right? It wasn't the 25 we have now. It was only 10 points then. So things were a lot tighter then, and you really appreciate how tight that is in that comparison of things. Yeah. When you think about it, that like I finished 7th and got 1 point or whatever, or 2 points. Yeah. Wow.
So I suppose the thing we've kind of danced around and not tackled so far is the nature of the car of what Vettel was driving, and kind of
nerdy
if there's
stuff.
any kind of amendments to make with it as well. Because we were in customer car era. This was the time where you had the Toro Rossos were effectively running modified / year-old Red Bull cars. Previously, we'd had Super Aguri doing the same with sort of some modified Hondas as well, and it had been a very kind of contentious point in time, and in that it was a legal thing to do. It was in the loopholes that if you wanted to, you could go and take these designs. The ruling was that if you did so, you weren't privy to kind of any constructors' money, because you couldn't be in the Constructors' Championship if you're not constructing the car. What these teams would do is that they would argue that it was being bought by like a third party. So in the case of Red Bull, they said, oh no, we don't design the cars. It's this company called Red Bull Technology that Adrian Newey works for. And then he just happens to share that design with Toro Rosso. So
Yeah.
it was a big kind of loophole around the system, and obviously that didn't go down very well with those who were at the back with them at the time. In 2008, that would have been the Force Indias and others that are kind of struggling more towards that rear end. So it was a very contentious point, and I think a lot of people will jump on that after this race as well, because it's wonderful that what had previously been Minardi gets to win a race, and especially the fact that it's at Monza as well. It's absolutely a fantastic story. But even though it's still a lot of the kind of the staff and the team around that enterprise, it's not Minardi anymore. It's something a lot bigger and a lot better funded in a way. So I've got a quote here from William CEO Adam Parr at the time, and he was very keen to kind of stress the point that Toro Rosso is not a small team. The budget of Red Bull technology to make the chassis is probably 80% more than ours, so it's simply not true to say that a small team won. A two-team group with a €500 million budget won a race.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so if I get the timeline correct on this, so Adrian Newey joined in 2006, right? Yeah.
Yes, I've been go through that year. Yeah, so his first kind of impact would have been in 2007, really.
Yeah, so the 2007 was the RB3 and the STR2, which was the car that they kind of had for the start of the season. Anyone listening, apologies if I'm butchering these names. I'm pretty sure it was STR2 to STR3, I think, is the one that won the race. So you had the RB3 in 2007, and the STR2, a lot of teams that was kind of one of the cards that caused a lot of people to get angry, because it was basically, it was just an RB3 chassis, basically. And that's what everyone's bee in their bonnet got about. I think, as you said, there was another couple of teams as well that were playing around with this sort of mischief. And that was Adrian Newey's first design, the RB3. Carried over then into the STR3 for Toro Rosso, or STR2, sorry, for Toro Rosso. And then they brought the same car, but like a B spec for the start of the season in 2008. Yes. So then basically that was when all of the clamoring and things had kind of the tail end of that, of them getting very, very annoyed and bringing in this new rule that no, both chassis have to be designed, separately and whatnot. But there was a loophole that if an independent third party built the cars, then they could do that. And Red Bull simply set up a Red Bull Technologies shell company, whatever you want to call it, put Adrian Newey in charge, and then that independent third party was allowed to design both the RB4 and the ST3 then as well. So yeah, the STR2B was like, if I'm not mistaken here, the STR2B was the first one with a Ferrari, or sorry, the STR2, the 2007 car, was the first one with a Ferrari engine, right?
That's correct. Yeah, so they had Cosworth in their first year, 2006, and moved across to Ferrari power.
Right, because Red Bull switched to Renault and gave the contract to Toro Rosso, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So, and what's crazy now that I think about it as well, you probably have this in front of you, but if I'm not mistaken, Toro Rosso actually beat Red Bull in the constructors standings as well that year in 2008.
They absolutely did, yeah, which is pretty much predominantly thanks to the performances that Vettel was turning out, because for Bourdais, all the bad luck he had, only scored about 4 points all year, so it was pretty much entirely Vettel kind of churning out those points. But yeah, I mean, and I think, if I'm right, I think again that's the only time that's happened. Obviously, Red Bull has kicked on in quite a big way since then, so it was never likely to be replicated again. But yeah,
and knew he couldn't design the chassis anymore, which probably
which also helped. I mean, that still didn't stop. I mean, I can still picture the scenes now. Dietrich Mateschitz was down in those kind of Toro Rosso garages and just celebrating that win, because it was, even though it wasn't his main outfit, it was still something he'd invested heavily in and bought and was a part of as well. So it was really kind of exciting scenes down there. And like I say, for so many of those had been former Minardi staff, it was just a whirlwind occasion.
For the nerdy people listening as well, that was also, it could have been 2007, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 2008 was the first season of the standardized ECUs, which are still built by McLaren technology. So that was the first year that they basically could no longer fiddle around with, putting traction control in when they shouldn't be able to. Not that they were doing that, not saying anyone was doing that, but it was the first year where they couldn't do that anymore because it was like a standardized ECU. Yeah, some interesting things when I think back to this. That year, they made a lot of changes, and then it led on to them kind of finally going, right, no more, we're just build your own goddamn chassis going forward. No more sharing. Because otherwise, I imagine you would have had Newey designing for 3 or 4 teams by the time we got into 2010 and 11. And yeah, sorry, just to go back to the race as well before we jump too much into technical and cars. Also, just a funny tidbit, isn't that the only race location that outfit has ever won in then? From Minardi through
correct,
to
yeah,
V
because Gasly won in the AlphaTauri in what was it, 2020, 2021? 2020, I think it
2021.
was.
No, it was it 2021? Because I think it was the year that... No, 2021 was McLaren. So you're right, it was 2020.
Yes.
I'm going to check that because...
It's okay. Cut all this out.
I'm
so
pretty
just
sure
insert a clip of you saying very confidently.
No, it definitely... Because I'm trying to think, because 2021 was when... was the 1-2 for McLaren because Ricardo was driving and he wouldn't have been in 2020.
Right, you're right. Yeah.
So it must have been 20. It was either 2020 or 2019. But I think 2020 was the first year of AlphaTauri. So that kind of
I'm pretty confident it was 2020, yeah.
Well, thankfully, we've got the internet now. The internets. Yeah, 2020. So it was Pierre Gasly and it was Carlos Sainz who finished half a second behind him, was chasing him down the whole race for his first race win. But yeah, well, like we think back to 2007, 2008, it's kind of wild, like just the landscape of Formula One when you think about it, because you've got this team Red Bull that comes in, and not only is like every team just not want them there because they're blaring music and everyone's like, oh, a drinks company's never going to win a championship, which obviously was proven wrong pretty quickly. And on top of that, they bought a second team. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, they bought Minardi first, right? And then Jaguar second.
No, other way around.
Was it? Okay.
They bought out Jaguar at the end of 2004.
2005.
And then it was Minardi at the end of 2005. Yeah, but yeah, again, it was still quite a big thing because, Sauber had always kind of been sort of this unofficial Ferrari B team, junior team, but it was never kind of written down in black and white. So this whole kind of this process was not really seen. Again, you had Super Aguri kind of coming along at the same sort of time, which was Honda's own kind of B team as well. But it just as a legacy by itself, that whole kind of Toro Rosso, RB, AlphaTauri, whatever you want to be calling it these days. Yeah, it's such a big part of F1 history because it was not really done before, and even now when it's had a proven track record of being like a working production line for talent. Not a lot of other people kind of replicate it or have seemingly tried to replicate it.
Yeah, like it's just the whole thing. It's just everything leading up to this race. When you think about like how Sebastian Vettel like got that car, and it's insane. You have Jaguar bought out Red Bull, as I said, laughing stock because it was like they're never going to win. This is a manufacturer sport, which they're trying to get back to again now, hilariously. So everyone's laughing. They're not going to win. They get Newey of all people, who, when you think about who Newey was at that time, I mean, the 90s is just literary. I'm trying to think of the words. You know what I mean? Litany. That's the one I'm thinking of. A litany of Newey cars winning championships. Throughout the 90s. Then he comes in. The McLaren that won in 2008, when you think about it, its DNA runs back to a Newey design in the first place. They get him over. And then on top of that, they buy a second team for the juniors. So Sebastian Vettel gets that. And then Newey and Red Bull find a loophole to allow Newey to design the car in the first place. And then the second junior team wins a race and wins the first race that Red Bull ever won as a grouping in Formula One. Mm-hmm. All because Newey was allowed to design that, and probably partly as well because Renault built the engine for the Red Bull, and we know Renault famously don't do things great. There's no better way to put that. But yeah, I'm fairly sure as well. I know my brain's racking. I know there's another incident, but I'm fairly sure that basically this win and the whole Newey controversy designing both cars was kind of the seed that caused them in 2000. I think it was 2009 to say, look, no more customer cars at all, no more sharing designs at all. We're done with that now. You design your own aero work, which still to this day is the kind of underlying of it. Obviously, Haas pushed that limit with using everything underneath, and RB, the same team, still kind of share a lot of the stuff, but the aerodynamic panels have to be your own work. You're not even allowed to share wind tunnel data anymore or anything. But I think this was the seed that kind of set it off. So Red Bull really did kind of upset Formula One quite a bit.
Yeah, I think the wheels had been in motion prior to this kind of point anyway. Again, we talked about Supercar a couple of episodes back, which again was a whole kind of outfit embroiled within that customer car scandal. And I think, but yeah, from what I remember of that, beginning of 2008, they'd sort of clamped down and said, right, you can do that for this year, you can do it for 2009, but 2010, you need to start making your own cars again, basically. And obviously, I'm sure this probably, was just added flame to that fire. Again, it had already been sorted, but they were kind of saying maybe it should have been clamped down a little bit sooner because it's creating situations like this.
Yeah, that's it's still a thing in Formula One, isn't it? Where no one really cares unless someone actually wins or gets on the podium. Like if this happened and the car was running around in 14th position, it's like, yeah, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's like all of a sudden now, since RB isn't a threat, we've noticed that Zach Brown is just kind of not talking about it anymore. It's not a big deal now. Well, they're not winning, so who cares? I know this is off topic, but I think it was Haas then that put the final nail in the idea of customer cars, like any sort, right? Because originally they were going to come in with last year's Ferrari with an exception, and then the teams basically said no, it's not happening. So they kind of
there was a fairly, I think, heavy backpedaling on that whole kind of notion. I mean, it's been discussed for years and years and years, and again, customer cars is something is part of Formula One's DNA. You go back to the 70s, and that's how outfits like Williams first started up, because you could just go out and you could buy an old March chassis and chuck a Cosworth engine in it, stick some driver in it, and just go racing again. It is a huge part of kind of where Formula One has been, and back to that kind of the very kind of pure racing kind of era where people went racing because they enjoyed racing, and it wasn't about the money or anything like that as well. So
back when you'd have 15 engineers building a car instead of 1,000.
Yeah, you could just do it in your shed and then just turn up to any weekend you fancied. So it was a totally kind of different kind of time.
Yeah.
So looking at this kind of Grand Prix as a whole, and we'll talk about where it kind of fits in on the ranking list in a little bit, but where does this kind of sit for you in terms of, I don't know, just some of Vettel's best races, or maybe kind of some of your more favourite Italian Grand Prix? I mean, what kind of level is it sitting in here? Is it clouded a little bit because Vettel won the race?
Yeah, a little bit. I think we did on our podcast, we obviously did a review or a preview of the Italian Grand Prix, and Casual for once did something well and asked, what's your favorite Italian Grand Prix? And he said, as a huge Vettel fan, said, oh, it's got to be 2021, right? So memorable. And I said, well, you're forgetting 2008, sir. And both of us then went on a bit of a tangent about it. I think this is my favorite Italian Grand Prix. Just kind of insane, And I should obviously big up Gasly, but I don't like the French, so here we are. But I don't know if you can. If it's YouTube, I was going to say, of course you can insult the French. I think it's my favorite Italian Grand Prix. In terms of favorites of Vettel's, it's probably up there just because it's the first, and it was really impressive, and all of, as we've spoken about, not even in the big team, all of these different things that kind of build up why it was so impressive. But then 2012, 2013, 2010, not leading the championship until the end. There's so many to choose from. It would probably be top 10. I probably wouldn't put it in my top 3 though, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think, in terms of all Italian races, I mean, I think your judgment's always clouded when it's a surprise winner, because that's always got that feel good kind of factor, and that's the ones you remember the most. Because again, off the top of my head, I'm going, yes, this was a really good one. So was that Gasly win. So was that Ricciardo win, because they were distinctly, I remember watching them and being so happy to see, someone else win either for the first time or the first time in a long time. It's
Leclerc
got a lot of
2019 as well.
Leclerc 19 is a great example as well. So yeah, There are better ones from history. I think. If you go back, I think it was 1971 is the closest ever finish at a Grand Prix. I think here it was, where it was about literally milliseconds crossing the top 5 or something like that. So I'd be remiss not to point that out on a history podcast. That there have been great races over the years at Monza. So
you watched that one live, didn't you?
I did, yeah. We'd just come out of our mother's womb together, and I was watching it, and I think you were off tinkering with something in the background.
Yeah, I was sketching out some Nui design in the background. Yeah.
So we come to the actual. I suppose that's the closing part of the video, and it's the whole reason we kind of go through these topics. Is where it kind of fits in this ranking list. So, spoiler alert: we've done 3 episodes. 3 episodes. This is the 3rd episode, but the second one today, so my brain is a little frazzled.
That's cool.
So thus far we've got Jacques Villeneuve, 97 world champion, sitting at number 1. Super Aguri, Honda B team with the shone kind of so brightly and quickly as well. It's a very difficult to be ranking. Anytime you're talking about what's your favorite race, what your favorite drives on this, and then to kind of compile them all into one list is obviously very tricky side by side. I mean, my initial gut instinct is this race is certainly better than a Super Aguri, for instance, in that it's very memorable and as good as Super Aguri, where they were around very briefly. And I think this is more of a memorable kind of event for me. Is just this event by itself better than the career of a world champion? A
world champion
is good enough.
Let's just be careful now, because this world champion also is the same person who said Ricardo was never good. So I have to dock him some points.
I'll recheck the whole thing. I'll put him down at the very bottom anyway.
Is it in your top 3? Let's start there.
Yeah, I suspect it probably was. Yeah, no, it's definitely in the top 2, and I'm just wrangling in my brain. I think part of it is that there is this cloud that comes with it, which is, if you're just looking at it through nostalgia goggles, it's this young kid winning for the first time in appalling conditions in this former Minardi. But then we have that asterisk with the customer cars coming after it. So if he'd won in a Minardi, then by all means this is one of the best things we've ever seen. But it was a better car than we initially kind of maybe remember it being. It had all the kind of the new attachments to it as well. So it's hard. It's hard to work out where I want to place it.
I mean, I could probably do it fairly simply from where I stand. Super Aguri for me doesn't. I don't have that like kind of bleeding love for Super Aguri. The story is interesting, but it's not like part of my DNA history with Formula One. Vettel is, and as much as I could blatantly just slag off Jacques Villeneuve, what he did was very impressive as well, so I'm not going to. And I remember watching Jacques Villeneuve 1997. My first ever memory of Formula One actually isn't Jacques Villeneuve, but it was the year before, 1996, Damon Hill coming across the line. My grandfather knew someone from Hill's family. I cannot remember the story, but I remember them drinking and shouting as Hill came across the line. So after that exciting time, then it was kind of every weekend watching Jacques Villeneuve in the Williams the year after. Also the reason I believe why Newey left, because of Frank Williams kicking Hill out. So a lot of history there.
Yeah.
But look, I'm not going to say this one win is better than all of Jacques Villeneuve's career. So I'm going to go Jacques Villeneuve, then the Vettel win, then Super Aguri. I think if we were doing a podcast about Vettel's entire career, I'd put this first because I'm a Vettel fanboy. And obviously he won more titles and there's Ferrari era, everything. Just one win though, I think I'd be a bit mean to say it's better than a French speaking man's career.
I think I'm going to agree with that as well. I think I desperately want to, because I think the in my mind the imagery of Vettel winning is very powerful. But then I witnessed it in my time in Villeneuve. I only kind of saw the tail end of his career, but obviously there's the success there. There's the whole story around it as well, which is fantastic. And then even just kind of the personality is as abrasive as it is quite iconic. Whereas, like you say, this is good, but we have those little asterisks next to it, which is there's better Grand Prix that we've had that will go ahead of someone like a Jacques Villeneuve because they're more impactful sort of stuff. Yeah, I think that feels like a fair place for us to put it.
Yeah. I maybe insulting to some Super Aguri fans. It just doesn't. I don't have that link to it, I guess.
No, and I think when we went back on that, we said Super Aguri was great, but they were around very briefly, and actually the bright lights they had were very kind of brief in the grand scheme of things, and they're not going to tumble all the way to the bottom of this because there is worse stuff and more anonymous kind of stuff from history. But yeah, it can't hold a candle to either a world champion or a future world champion kind of beginning the genesis of this journey to being one of the most successful drivers we've had of all time.
Yeah, and as a note as well, as an Irish person, if your grid rankers doesn't end with Jordan at number 1, I'm going to be sending a very strongly worded letter.
I'll be sure to absolutely not read that letter. Well, Jason, thank you so much for coming on the channel. I really appreciate you jumping in. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
No, it's been great. I've done a lot of work with Jason in more recent times. Him and the Casual F1 Fan have a podcast called the Blatantly Biased Racing Podcast. I've been on it a few times. I'll pop all the links down in the bio, and if you go on my channel, there's a playlist with all the guest appearances that I've done with it as well. So if you go and show those guys some love, it's much appreciated. But for now, I've been the Mobile Chicane. That's been Jason Hassett, and you've been listening to Grid Rankers. Thank you.